Welcome to the deep dive. We're starting today with this really profound idea that the knowledge that defines us isn't always something we just inherit cleanly.
Right. It's not like a neat package handed down. More often it's something you have to dig up, and usually painfully.
Exactly. It's retrieved from under, layers of family trauma, decades of regret, and the consequences of these choices that people made when they had no other options.
That's a perfect way to put it. If you think of a family's history like an archaeological dig, the most important stories, the ones that really shape everyone's identity, they're often the ones that were deliberately buried.
Or, they're fossilized inside these old family tales, these parables, and they only really make sense decades later.
When they emerge with this devastating clarity.
And that's what we're doing today. We are undertaking a deep dive into it's a magnificent multi-generational archive. Collection of excerpts from Khaled Hosseini's novel, And the Mountains Echoed.
We're treating this material as a set of interconnected historical accounts. It's this sweeping story that starts in 1952 Afghanistan, and then it moves through Paris in the 70s, back to Afghanistan in the early 2000s.
And it all culminates in this fragmented reunion in California in 2010. It's a huge scope.
It is. And our mission really is to trace what you could call the emotional DNA of these stories. We're tracking the quiet devastation caused by one single brutal decision.
The sacrifice of a child.
The necessary sacrifice of a child for economic survival. And we're going to watch how that one act creates these narrative echoes that they distort and define the lives of everyone involved across continents and decades.
We'll be looking at all the different faces of sacrifice, the crushing weight of guilt that gets passed down, and this constant search for connection in a world that seems just determined to keep these people apart.
And you should be prepared for some surprising connections and these quiet, often really painful revelations that, once you understand them, they change absolutely everything about how you see these characters.
So our emotional roadmap for this entire journey, it starts not with the main characters, Abdullah and Pari, but with a kind of foundational story, a myth.
The tale of Baba Ayub and his youngest son, Qais. And this story, it really serves as the parable, the emotional blueprint for the main separation that drives everything else.
It immediately throws us into this world of incredible poverty, which is really the engine of the whole tragedy, isn't it?
It absolutely is. Baba Ayub is a farmer in a village called Maidan Sabz, and his life is just defined by the ceaseless, crushing labor. The text says his back was curved as the scythe he swung all day.
Wow. And his hands.
His hands were perpetually calloused, bleeding from the work. His entire existence was just pure toil, so much so that he'd fall into this exhausted sleep the second he laid down.
And all of this is happening against the backdrop of a terrible perpetual drought. But somehow, in all this hardship, he has this unique, almost total tenderness for his youngest son, Qais.
Yes, the 3-year-old. He's described as having these unforgettable dark blue eyes and a devilish laughter. He was the one child who seemed to hold all of his father's capacity for joy and hope.
But there's this initial problem, a conflict that's both, touching and also terrifying.
Qais is a sleepwalker. He has this habit of wandering out of their little mud house into the darkness.
Yeah.
And they're terrified he's going to fall into a well or run into a wild animal.
So Baba Ayub comes up with this solution that is just so heartbreakingly poetic.
It is. He takes a tiny bell from a goat's neck and hangs it around Qais' neck. Yeah. The idea is that the slightest movement, the little ringing sound, would wake someone up.
That bell. It's such a perfect, fragile symbol of a father's protection, the little bit of security he can offer.
A very temporary security, though, because that security is completely shattered by the reality of their environment. The years pass, the droughts get worse, and Maidan Sabz is facing a real famine. Babies are dying of thirst in their cribs.
So the economic choice becomes an impossible one.
And Baba Ayub's anguish just swells. He stops working, he stops praying, he just sits alone, completely consumed by despair, until he decides to go on this desperate, almost suicidal quest.
To find the Div, the mythical creature who has supposedly taken Kai.
Right. And the journey itself just underscores how broken he is. He climbs this mountain, his clothes get shredded, his feet are bloodied by the rocks, hawks are circling him. But his resolve, it says, remained unshaken.
And when he finally gets to the Div, we reach the absolute moral core of this story. The Div offers him a choice. And this is where the parable really translates this idea of a necessary loss.
It's an agonizing choice. Option 1, he can take Qais back to the village, Back to that life of hard labor, the drought, where Kais might just die of starvation anyway, but he'd be doing it to fulfill his own selfish desire to have his son back.
Or,
Or option two, he can leave Kais in the Div's fort, a life of luxury, comfort, opportunity, knowing his son is alive and safe, but he's forbidden from ever seeing him again.
it's the definition of an impossible choice that parents face under this kind of absolute pressure.
But is it really a choice? I mean, that's what you have to ask yourself. Or is it just necessity dressed up as a moral paradox?
Right. If the life back home is almost certain death, then leaving the child isn't a moral failing, is it? It's a brutal act of providing for him.
That's the critical distinction. It's the difference between a mythological choice and just grim economic necessity. The Div, this creature of pure power, he just strips away any pretense that Baba Ayub has free will here.
But he's completely undone by it. He gets so despondent that he takes the hourglass the div gave him and smashes it into 1,000 pieces.
And all the sand just spills everywhere. Time, hope, his sense of who he is as a father, it's all destroyed in that moment.
When he leaves, the div gives him this final, really unsettling gift. Or curse. It's a small glass flask with a dark liquid to drink.
And the reaction back in the village is just immediate, brutal judgment. They call him a coward. They say a real father would have died defending his family.
But there's this profound counterpoint to that. The collective voice of the village, they only see failure and cowardice.
But his wife, when she finally sees this thin, wretched figure coming home days later, just weeping, she recognizes the profound soul-deep suffering. She understands he's a man who chose life for his son, but at the cost of his own identity and happiness.
So this tale, it directly sets up the painful logic of cutting a piece of yourself off to save the whole.
Exactly. Baba Ayub's sacrifice, choosing long-term survival for his son over his own immediate love, is the conceptual blueprint for the separation that Sabur will carry out decades later with Abdullah and Pari.
It shows how extreme pressure forces parents into choices that look monstrous from the outside, but are intended in their own desperate way to save the child from an even worse fate.
So if the parable showed us the sort of theoretical impossibility of that choice, the next part of the story translates that same cruel logic directly into the real-world economics of Sabur's decision in 1952.
We move from myth to the devastating reality of a village called Shadbagh.
And we meet Abdullah, who's about 10, and his little sister Pari, who's 3. The material establishes right away that they're leftovers from another woman, which highlights their kind of marginalized status in the family with their stepmother, Parwana.
But their bond is just.
Yeah.
It's immediate, it's profound, and it's so heartbreakingly pure because they really only have each other.
And that connection is anchored by this one simple, irreplaceable object, Pari's old tin tea box.
Given to her by Abdullah. And it held all her treasures. These feathers she collected. The best one was an iridescent green peacock feather with a big eye at the tip.
Abdullah sees her, very pointedly, as his only true family. That's the core of his world.
The journey they take from Shadbagh to Kabul is just defined by physical suffering, isn't it?
Completely. They're crossing the desert in these painful sandals. Abdullah is in the wagon, feeling the little knobs of his sister's spine pressing against his belly. And the sheer toil is embodied by their father, Sabur, who's walking ahead, pulling them like a mule.
And Sabur, their father, has this incredibly harsh view of the world. It's clearly a worldview that's been forged by years of drought and hardship.
He has this belief that nothing good came free, even love. You paid for all things. And if you were poor, suffering was your currency.
That's a kind of psychological preparation, isn't it? Accepting suffering as a transactional requirement, it foreshadows the ultimate price he's about to make them all pay.
And his work history just proves it. Picking apples, making bricks, lugging stones. It's just a relentless, unrewarded existence.
Then their uncle, Nabi, brings them to Kabul for a construction job at the wealthy Wadadi home. And the contrast between their life and this opulent city is just staggering.
Immediately. Kabul has a silo bread factory, which is described as a complement of our friends the Russians, which subtly sets this political context of the modern world intruding.
And the Wadadi house itself, to Abdullah, it seems like the Div's palace from the story. He's just astonished by the effortless wealth.
The porcelain toilet, the glittering sink, and this miracle of water just coming out of a tap with a twist of the hand. You have to imagine, for him, this is an unbelievable luxury compared to lugging heavy buckets from the well in Shadbagh.
And he becomes immediately painfully self-conscious of his own dirtiness, his own poverty, compared to this polished, dust-free world.
And it's here that we meet Mrs. Naila Wadadi, who is the central figure in this this transaction.
She's half Afghan, half French. She's described as strikingly attractive, intelligent, fiercely flirtatious,
Hmm.
but also very aware of her own performance.
Very performative. We learned she insisted on sitting on the floor when she visited their village, making a show of the visit. It's a gesture that's supposed to broadcast her social awareness, but really it just underlines how distant she is from their reality.
Her dialogue perfectly captures that removed perspective. She talks about tribal traditions and praises the authentic lives of people in the countryside.
Seeing them through this academic, almost colonial lens, and her husband, Suleiman, he tells her pointedly to stop during this, which just highlights how artificial her praise is.
And then Nyla reveals the deep personal void that is her real motivation for buying Pari.
She looks out the window, and with this real heaviness, she says, "It will be good to have a child around the house, a little noise for a change, a little life." It hints at a sadness that goes way beyond just loneliness.
And she gives the devastating medical reason for what she calls her hollowness. She says, "They scooped it all out of me in India. I'm hollow inside."
So she's buying a child not out of charity, but out of a profound, literal, and spiritual emptiness that she expects this little girl, Pari, to fill.
The time in Kabul is marked by this one sharp memory of luxury Pari getting a pair of yellow sneakers at the bazaar. But the separation itself, it's just instantaneous and brutal.
It's pure emotional mayhem. Nabi just whisks Pari away. She's shrieking, "Abdullah! Abdullah!" And Abdullah tries to fight past his father to get to her.
And Sobor hits him hard across the cheek and just tells him, "Go home."
The emotional fallout is immediate. Once they're back in Shadbagh, the suppression begins. No one speaks Pari's name. She just vanishes from village life, as if she never existed.
And Abdullah's only companion in his grief is their dog, Shuja.
And that detail about Shuja is just heartbreaking. The dog keeps coming back to their house, even though the stepmother, Parwana, throws rocks at him and Sabor uses a stick.
Until finally Shuja just hobbles away, head hung low. He's like a silent, furry mirror to Abdullah's own abandonment and despair.
And Parwana tries to justify this impossible choice to Abdullah with this chillingly clinical economic language.
It had to be her. I am sorry, Abdullah. She had to be the one. The finger cut to save the hand.
That phrase, the finger cut to save the hand, it's the logic of the extreme poor. But Abdullah finds this one crucial way to resist, to preserve something.
He secretly retrieves Pari's cherished feather box, that tin tea box, from a hole behind the windmill.
And he hides it. It's the only tangible piece of the love that was just ripped apart.
Yeah.
And it's now hidden, waiting for decades, like a secret history just waiting to be unearthed.
Our entire understanding of that separation, of why it happened, it completely shifts years later, thanks to this remarkable document.
Nabi's posthumous letter to a Greek surgeon, a Mr. Marcos. And this letter is basically a long confession that reveals the hidden emotional and sexual architecture of the Wadati household.
And Nabi's own deep guilt in the sale of his niece.
Nabi's story starts with this profound sense of being psychologically trapped in Shadbagh. He left in 1946 to get away from a stifling life with his sisters, one of whom was an invalid.
He claimed he was leaving to provide for them, but he confesses his real motive was just pure selfish escape. He felt his youth was being truncated in the village.
And that desire for escape is what makes him so vulnerable to the glamour and allure of the Wadati family.
He very quickly goes from being just a good servant to an essential, almost intimate part of the household. He learns all of Suleiman's precise habits.
The morning walks where Nabi had to struggle to match his long strides, the hours Suleiman spent reading and drawing in his study. Nabi knew it all.
And his internal analysis of his employer is incredibly sharp. He saw Suleiman as a mystifying creature.
A man living off an inheritance with no profession, no passion, no purpose. He says he lived life from the back seat, observed as it blurred by.
But the real suppressed driver of Nabi's entire life in that house was his intense, unacknowledged romantic obsession with Nyla.
He describes watching her smoke with bewitching grace, noticing her slender wrist, her dark curls, and he asks himself this question that basically defined his entire servitude.
What was left to do in life once you had done that? Where did a man go next once he'd stood at the World Summit?
He was completely enthralled by her. And Nyla, in turn, she used him as a confidant, complaining endlessly about Suleiman being aloof, arrogant.
She called him a brooding old man trapped in a younger man's body.
And Nabi saw the chilling distance between them. Suleiman would call her Aziz, which means beloved. But the term always sounded starched, and the couple never seemed more distant than when he used it.
And then comes the critical, just jaw-dropping revelation that completely redefines everything.
Nyla, in a fit of bitterness, confirms that Suleiman is in love with the chauffeur, with Nabi himself.
And that explains everything. Suleiman's kindness, his preference for Nabi's company, the tragic lack of fulfillment in his marriage, it all clicks into place.
And this changes how we view Nabi's own complicity in what happened to Pari. He admits that he became a sin enabler for Nyla, facilitating her parties, buying her liquor, because his priority was always just to please her.
But his devotion to Nyla was challenged when Pari arrived.
He admits to feeling a shade of resentment toward his own niece because Pari was consuming all of Nyla's time and attention, and he was fading into the background.
It's a profound moment of guilt that he confesses. He was so obsessed with Nyla that he actually resented the child she bought.
Which made it easier for him to facilitate the separation and then carry the burden of that guilt for decades. He didn't just see it as a desperate act for Sabor. He saw it as an opportunity for himself to get Nyla's attention back.
Years later, after Nyla has left and the separation is long past, Suleiman suffers a devastating stroke.
He becomes a frozen mask. He can't communicate except through these hoarse grunts and these insistent shooing motions at visitors. Especially his pompous mother, who would show up wearing black as if he were already dead, with her yapping dogs.
And this is where Nabi's role shifts. His servitude transforms into genuine, deep devotion.
He provides decades of patient, long-term care. He fought with Suleiman over using a wheelchair, arguing that if they didn't get out of the house, Nabi himself would go insane. He took him out, played cards, chess.
And most importantly, Suleiman patiently tutored Nabi. He helped him truly advance his literacy, giving him the intellectual tools he needed to escape the limitations of his past.
Then, in 1968, the suppressed emotion finally comes to the surface. Suleiman confesses his long-hidden love for Nabi. He says he realizes it was an impossible thing for them, given the time and place, but that he found deep solace just in having Nabi near him.
And in this act that seems so contradictory, Suleiman tells Nabi to leave, to go find a wife and a family. He says, "There is still time for you."
And Nabi jokingly refuses. He secures Suleiman's trust and reaffirms his own devotion to staying.
But you have to wonder, was Suleiman's final act of generosity, leaving him the house, was it truly selfless love? Or was it a final, subtle act of ownership?
That's a challenging question. By ensuring Nabi stayed connected to his life's work, the house, did he guarantee Nabi's servitude would continue, just through the mechanism of maintenance and inheritance?
Maybe it was both. A man who couldn't express his love openly in life found a legal, binding way to keep the object of his affection close, even after his death.
The final, silent confirmation of that profound love comes when Nabi discovers Suleiman's sketchbooks, and they are filled entirely with charcoal drawings.
Not grand portraits, just drawings of Nabi doing mundane, everyday tasks, wiping the car, chopping wood, napping, tying his shoelaces.
And this revelation of silent, patient devotion, Nabi writes that it nearly buckled his knees. It revealed a lifelong love that had just quietly structured the entire reality of their existence together.
This all culminates in Suleiman's death scene. Near the end, Suleiman hands Nabi an envelope. Inside is the condition for inheriting the house.
And Nabi seals his devotion. He kisses Suleiman's dry, cracked lips, holds him tightly, and helps him die. This inheritance is the legal mechanism that finally, decades later, brings the truth to Pari. And it proves that the silent, impossible love between two men was the strongest and most defining connection in that house.
So that core separation in 1952, which was facilitated by the tangled needs of Nyla, Suleiman, and Nabi, it created this massive ripple effect that defines the next generation. Let's look first at Nyla and her daughter Pari in exile.
Nyla's life after Kabul is defined by this fierce effort to just divorce herself from her past. In a 1974 interview in France, she says she considers herself literally divorced from her troublesome half, her Afghan side.
She reflects on the history of her homeland, debating whether King Amanullah, who tried to ban the veil in polygamy, was a visionary or a fool. And she notes that the line between the two is perilously thin.
And she reveals that her own tyrannical nature towards Pari was inherited. She had a difficult, contentious childhood defined by separation and abuse. Her parents divorced in 1939. She stayed in Kabul with her Pashtun aristocratic father, while her French mother died during the Nazi occupation.
And her relationship with her father was abusive and claustrophobic. He would lock her up, hit her with a belt or his fist, chase her around the room.
And that emotional tyranny, it fueled her early artistic rebellion, but tragically, she just ended up reproducing that same tyranny with her own adopted child.
Her early poetry was apparently groundbreaking for Farsi literature. It broke from classic structure, and she wrote about transcendent claustrophobia and the struggle against tyranny.
Which was clearly a veiled critique of her father, but then she becomes a kind of emotional tyrant herself. And Nyla, ever the cynic, had this very specific, very brief theory of marriage.
You know within 2 weeks if it's going to work.
Right. And her final painful judgment on Pari, the child she bought to fill that hollow space, is so telling. She says, "I've come to believe she's my punishment."
Which brings us to Pari herself, Nyla's daughter. She grew up feeling the absence of something or someone fundamental to her own existence, a feeling that came from the trauma of her separation and the chaos of Nyla's life.
She studied mathematics at the Sorbonne. Nyla suggests this was her form of rebellion against her mother's fluid, chaotic, artistic life.
And you can see that, right? Pari has this deep-seated need to impose order, rationality, and structure on a life that was just defined by emotional instability. Math became her fortress against the chaos she inherited.
Her relationship with her mother was defined by that chaos. Nyla was reckless, starting in any relationships with high drama.
In Pari's brief fling with an older professor, Julienne, that became the final straw, the final push for Maman to commit suicide. And Pari just wrestles with this immense guilt over it.
Her internal struggle is rooted in her status as a replacement. She wonders, what was I, Maman? A seed of hope, a ticket purchased to ferry you from the dark, a patch for that hole you carried in your heart. If so, then I wasn't enough.
She constantly felt the weight of being this borrowed ticket, not a real biological anchor.
And we get one vague but really critical memory fragment that links her back to Kabul. She remembers asking Nyla if they had a dog there, and Nyla just replies cynically, "Dogs have no self-respect. You kick them and they still love you."
But Pari has this distinct, hazy memory of a big, mean specimen, furry, dirty, with a severed tail and ears.
And that cynical comment, filtered through the memory of the dog Shuja, it connects her suppressed history in Afghanistan to her current confusion in Paris.
Now let's shift entirely to the early 2000s, post-Taliban, and look at these parallel efforts to find justice and identity. We meet Marcos Varvaris.
The Greek surgeon who Nabi addresses in his confession. Marcos is working for an NGO in Kabul, fixing children's facial injuries. He's literally trying to mend the physical scars of arbitrary injustice.
And his choice of plastic surgery was inspired by a childhood trauma. His friend, Talia, her face was mutilated by a dog bite, and he chose this profession because he wants to rectify, with each slice of my scalpel, an arbitrary injustice.
The dog bite, a landmine, a birth defect. He wants to fix it. But Thalia's response to her own injury is this remarkable moment of resilience that challenges his entire reason for being a surgeon.
She refused his offer to fix her face. She just declared, "This is who I am."
It took her a lifetime for her to mold it into an identity. And Marcos comes to understand that not all scars are meant to be erased. Some are necessary parts of who you are.
And Marcos realizes his mother, Odelia, gave him a greater gift than he knew: permanence. She would never leave him. And that's in sharp contrast to Thalia's mother, Madeleine, who fled her marriage and just abandoned Thalia with them.
This focus on justice and return brings us to Idris and Timur, the Afghan and Wiccan cousins who go back in 2003 to reclaim their family's property, which is suddenly skyrocketing in value because of all the foreign aid workers.
They really represent the dilemma of the diaspora returning to this fractured post-conflict country.
And they're total opposites. Timur is wildly sociable, handsome, he cheats on his wife, he cheats on his taxes, but he has this beguiling air of innocence. He basically manufactures his own reality, even writing his own press releases.
And Idris is the opposite. Quiet, sensitive, but deeply resentful and envious of Timur's bravado. He sees Timur as the quintessential ugly Afghan-American.
Tearing through the city, making a loud, visible show of giving money from his bakshish bundle. It's all a highly calculated performance designed to alleviate his own immigrant guilt.
So Idris, who is looking for some kind of authentic connection, some atonement, he tries to distance himself from that performance by getting involved with the Roshi tragedy.
This young girl whose family was murdered by her uncle over a property dispute. The uncle nearly decapitated her father with an axe. It's horrific. And Idris feels this immense self-flagellating guilt, and he thinks he's found an unexpected intimacy, a drug in her suffering, a way to be a real hero.
But his attempt at this authentic good intention, it just completely collapses when he gets back to the U.S.
He gets swamped by the mundane, frustrating demands of his life as a doctor, dealing with an unpleasant patient, Mrs. Rasmussen, complicated schedules, the shame of a peer review for a misdiagnosis.
And Roshi becomes an abstraction. He starts deleting the emails from her caretaker, Amra, and realizes his promise to help was a reckless mistake.
And his failure highlights this powerful psychological truth. Performative charity, like Timur's, is easier to maintain from a distance because it requires no real emotional investment.
But authentic help, like what Idris was trying to do, it demands continuous, messy commitment that just often collapses under the weight of everyday life.
And the failure is sealed by this final, stinging betrayal. Roshi, now healed and in the U.S., writes a book, and she dedicates it to her saviors, my mother Amra and my kaka Timur.
Idris goes to her book signing, but he's just steamrolled. Roshi is amused and distant. She doesn't acknowledge him. And it concerns that Timur successfully paraded himself as the hero. Idris's quiet, authentic attempt at doing good was completely erased by Timur's relentless self-promotion. The story of Adele, which is set in 2009 in Dushanbe, it brings us full circle. It shows how the violence and greed born from war and inequality, they haven't gone away. They've just transferred from the poor to the newly rich.
Adele lives this incredibly isolated life in a massive, boring compound. This is the new definition of wealth in post-conflict Afghanistan. He's homeschooled for security reasons because of kidnappings, and he's just desperate for friendship.
His young mother, Arya, she was only 14 when she married his father, Babajan, and she spends her days working out to thumping music. It's her own form of isolation.
And Babajan, Adele's father, is this major, imposing figure. A wealthy landowner and former mujahid, a term that carries all this complex historical baggage. He even commissioned a statue of a mujahid in the town square, positioning himself as a war hero and a great man.
And he deliberately cultivates this image of being a benefactor, patiently receiving the poor at the mosque men with muddy hands, young widows, all seeking favors and loans.
But this ritualized charity is just a mask for the violent source of his new wealth.
And Adele's privileged bubble is profoundly shattered when he meets Golem, a boy his own age who is poor, big toes poking through his sneakers, stiff jeans. And his family, who have returned from Pakistan, are squatting on land that Babajan claims is his.
The clash of their two worlds is immediate and brutally honest. Golem is cynical, he says. Your father picks his nose and people hear about it. It's a subtle way of saying his father is not the hero Adele thinks he is.
Adel defends him, citing his charity work, the new school he built for girls.
But Golem reveals the hidden cruelty underneath all that charity. His family believes the land they're on is rightfully theirs, and he calls Babajan a thief. He describes how his father's goon, Kabir, ordered them off the land while showing them his Kalashnikov.
The new wealth is built on the same old foundations of brute force and theft.
And this clash culminates during a dinner party Babajan is throwing for his old jihadi friends. The piece of the compound is just violently broken. Glass shatters as rocks fly through the window.
It's a direct physical protest against Babajan's injustice. The rocks are the physical manifestation of the grievance Golem voiced.
And this incident triggers Adele's profound awakening. He realizes dormant gears began to turn in his mind. He finally sees his father's house for the monstrosity, the affront, the monument to injustice that it really is to other people.
He recognizes the intimidation, the fear that underpins all the villagers' forced respect for his father.
And most tragically, Adele looks inward. He recognizes the conflicting truths inside himself, and he predicts his own moral trajectory. He knows he will eventually accept these injustices, like his mother had, either through fear or as a bargain for luxury and comfort.
He foresees his future self compromising his own conscience for the sake of his privilege.
And the separation here, it's no longer purely familial, it's socioeconomic. Adel reflects on Golem's inevitable fate. Golem is now the head of his family, doomed to a life of hard labor, clearing canals, making bricks.
Gradually turning into a stooping, leather-faced man, Adel recognizes his privilege is built on Golem's impending ruin.
So we've seen Adel recognize how trauma creates these new monsters of wealth, but now let's turn back to the original victim of that first economic decision, Pari, decades later, and see how that trauma has sort of fossilized in her own physical reality.
We jump forward to 2010. Pari, the sister who was sold in 1952, is now an older woman, a professor in France. She's struggling with a failing marriage, and her kids are emotionally detached.
And her physical reality reflects her internal state. She has rheumatoid arthritis and takes pills for her hands, the very parts of her body that you would use for collecting and grasping things.
The mechanism for the reunion is finally activated by Marcos Varvaris, the Greek surgeon. He contacts Pari through Facebook after translating Nabi's incredible posthumous letter.
Marcos explains Nabi's dying wish was for Pari to receive the house, the money, and this letter of confession. It finally bridges those decades of silence.
So, armed with this knowledge that's decades late, Pari travels to Kabul. She learns Nabi was her landlord, and she visits Shad Bagi now. She finds an old man who knew her half-brother Iqbal, and eventually discovers that Abdullah, now called Baba, is living in California.
The reunion we've been waiting for this whole time finally happens at an airport. Pari, the daughter, meets Pari, the aunt. And the older Pari notes the irony, the haziness of her own features, and tells her niece, "Time, it is like charm, you never have as much as you think."
But the reunion is immediately undercut by tragedy. It just confirms the destructive power of that initial separation. Abdullah suffers from severe dementia,
He's frail, he's petulant, he lives in a nursing home, his daughter only brings him home sometimes.
and his daughter, who is also named Pari, still performs their childhood ritual. She plucks bad dreams from his head, searching behind his ears, and then places a good dream on his brow.
The exact ritual he used to perform for her, it's this heartbreaking reversal of roles. A daughter trying to provide the stability her father once gave her.
When Pari, the aunt, finally meets Abdullah, the conversation just ceases. It fails completely. He's confused and frail. He's only capable of one single remark that pierces the fog of his illness.
You have the same name. The two of you have the same name. So there you have it. The only thing that registers is the name, not the sister he lost.
And the emotional climax is just devastating. Abdullah attacks his sister Pari with his cane. He yells, "She's a thief. She stole my pills."
That primal violence of the separation, the father striking Abdullah all those years ago, it's echoed in Abdullah's demented, confused accusation against his long-lost sister.
The chaos is instantly calmed when his daughter, Pari, strokes his shoulder and distracts him with the Weather Channel. Just a small, mundane window back to reality for him.
But the real closure is found in a final, quiet revelation between the two Paris. The daughter reveals her mother's deathbed confession. Abdullah had been secretly sending $1,000 every 3 months for years to his half-brother Iqbal in a refugee camp near Peshawar.
And this reveals the true emotional cost and the penance he'd been paying. Abdullah, unable to articulate his guilt or his grief over Pari, spent decades performing this silent, secret act of familial devotion to his half-brother.
It was his attempt to fulfill his debt, to compensate for the love he felt he took from his father's family. This was his lifelong, unseen act of atonement.
And finally, the physical artifact that has anchored this entire story is returned. Pari, the daughter, presents the original source of the grief, the lost tea box, which she found when she was clearing out her old room.
And the feathers are still inside. After all these decades, the dense green and burgundy rooster feathers, the white dove feather, and the crowning piece, that iridescent green peacock feather with the large eye at the tip.
You have to imagine the immense symbolic weight of that single, tiny piece of organic material anchoring decades of separation and pain.
And this final object, it unlocks the true depth of the trauma for the older Pari. She explains her lifelong feeling of an absence, a vague pain without a source.
And her niece, Pari, feels the years folding, something clicking into place, something ripped apart long ago being sealed again.
So despite the tragedy of Abdullah's condition and how late this reunion is, Pari the aunt finds this profound, necessary peace.
She tells her niece, "We have found each other, no. And this is who he is now. It's all right. I feel happy. I have found a part of myself that was lost."
And the lasting image that the daughter, Pari, is left with is this symbol of their fractured life, the Pont Saint-Benazet in Avignon, a half-bridge with only 4 arches remaining.
It ends midway across the river. Like it reached, tried to reunite with the other side and fell short. It's a perfect metaphor for their reunion. Fractured, incomplete, but they did finally touch the other side.
That journey from the mythic necessary separation of Baba Ayoub and Kais all the way to the fragmented, physically present reunion of Abdullah and Pari. It's just a powerful study in inherited guilt and devotion.
We've seen how these painful, pivotal choices, made by key figures, Baba Ayoub sacrificing Kais for a chance at life, Sabur sacrificing Pari for economic survival,
Nabi suppressing his love for Suleiman, and Naila buying Pari to fill her own void. All of those decisions created narratives that define the lives of others, often thousands of miles away.
I think the ultimate theme here is the devastating but also necessary clarity that comes with these late life realizations.
Absolutely. Nabi's confession, Marcos's choice of vocation because of Thalia, Adele's sudden understanding of his father's corruption, and Pari's final acceptance of her broken brother. These revelations provide the crucial missing pieces of a life lived in confusion.
The true cost of that original separation, it wasn't just the immediate loss back in 1952. It was the decades of searching, the self-sabotage.
And the complex, often painful efforts required to find even a fragmented sense of self. It took a lifetime to uncover the single truth that was hidden beneath that one single act.
So here's the final provocative thought for you to consider. Think about the power of the unseen commitment. Abdullah, plagued by a guilt he could never articulate, silently sent money to his half-brother Iqbal for years. It was his quiet, secret penance for the separation of Pari.
What silent actions or suppressed connections are currently echoing through your own life, waiting for a letter or maybe a tea box of old feathers to bring them to light? Look for the quiet, often painful acts of devotion that define the true, hidden history of your family, just waiting to be discovered.